Hi guys, today I have Olivia Powell, a certified life coach. She started out as a relationship coach to help women overcome toxic and narcissist love relationships, as well as work through their own codependency. Turn business coach, turn podcast coach, where Olivia helps women to find, plus use their voice for greater impact, plus influence in the world, as well as to elevate their personal brands. Thank you so much for being here, Olivia.
Thank you so much for having me, Giselle. I'm so excited to be here today.
Me too. So why did you become a life coach?
Why did I become a life coach? For me, it was a couple of reasons. I had spent quite a few years so I've got 2 degrees. So I'm a registered nurse and a registered midwife.
Mm,
And the reason why I went into that career was because I really wanted to help people and make a difference. And what I kind of realized throughout my time with my career was you do and can help people, but the way that I wanted to help them was actually more fundamentally. So as opposed to just treating their wounds or doing their blood pressure, and this is not to talk down on those activities at all because they're imperative and so essential and important, I
mm,
realized that I really wanted to work with people on an emotional level,
mm,
um, and not just a physical level. So that's kind of what piqued my interest with life coaching. And it's funny because back in high school, I heard the term life coach and I loved doing psychology because in Melbourne, in Australia, guys, you can do 2 units of psych. And I absolutely fell in love with it. And I really don't know why I didn't go down that path and become like a psychiatrist or a psychologist or whatever. Obviously it wasn't meant to happen, and then I discovered what life coaching was and was really attracted to the idea, more so than psychology as well, because I thought I want to help, well, healthy people just achieve their dreams and, do better and all that sort of stuff, as opposed to treating people that, had some really, you know heavy, like, really, really tough psychological mental health
mm.
conditions. Do you know what I mean? I just want to help people like achieve their goals and create an even better life, from good to great sort of thing. So yeah, that's kind of what got me started.
And when was the moment that you pivot from life coaching to relationship coach?
So when you study life coaching, I don't know if you know this or not, but the way I did it is I did it as a diploma through it's called the Life Coaching College in Sydney, Australia,
Mm,
by distance and also some face-to-face training. So when you get that diploma, you can go into any niche or specialty you want to go into. And when I signed up, I really had no idea where I wanted to go in terms of life coaching. I just knew that I liked it, and I was like, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to follow what feels good. And then
mm,
it kind of became clearer that through that period of time, my relationship with my fiance had broken down, and I was gone on this like self-discovery journey, trying to find out who I was as a single woman, that
mm,
didn't have a partner to focus on, and trying to find myself basically.
mm.
And so when I was healing and recovering myself, I thought, oh my gosh, the stuff I've learned is too good not to share with others. I have to help other women that have been through the same thing as me. And at that point in time, I didn't know if there was anyone out there that had been through the same or a similar experience as myself, because I wasn't aware of that. I'd only just entered that world of what this all meant and narcissism, and learning that I had codependent traits and issues and stuff that I had no idea about.
Mm.
So that's kind of what got me into helping other women with that, because I was like, oh, this is something that I've overcome. This is something that I've worked through. I feel like I'm in a place where I can help other people with this now. I'm no longer in like crisis mode. I'm actually rebuilding my life and I'm in a good place. So that's kind of what made me think, I have to help other people like with this. It just fitted in beautifully.
That is awesome. I love it. When you
Thank you.
were in the toxic relationship, how did you notice he's a narcissist?
I didn't.
Mm,
So I had no idea that he was narcissistic when I was with him. So my ex-fiance and I were together for nearly 6.5 years.
mm,
We lived together for 3 of those years, or 3 or 4 of those years, and we were engaged for 2.5 to 3 years of that relationship. Um, it was the classic thing where he had a mask on, he was acting like my Prince Charming. I fell in love with him very, very quickly. Things moved and progressed quite quickly together. Fell head over heels. He chased me. He did all the big romantic gestures, rocking up on my doorstep with a suit on Valentine's Day and a Gucci bag and a single red rose, and taking me out to fine dining experiences, and, protecting me when we'd walk on the street. He'd walk on the side closest to the cars to keep me safe, and he made that very obvious. And it made me feel, as a woman, really safe and protected and cared for. And then over time, of course, that was all a facade in order to get me to fall in love with him. And the mask started to slip, and his real personality and true colors started to show. And yeah, like, I guess I didn't really know what a narcissist was. I'd heard the term narcissistic, had no idea that there was a condition called narcissistic personality disorder, had no idea that there was manipulation and abuse tactics. I was very sheltered as a child. Like, you know, even though I did a little bit of psych at school, we never covered personality disorders or anything like that. So I just thought that he was changing as a man. And I thought he was a bit of a difficult personality, but some people can be. So I didn't read too much into it. And it wasn't until after the breakdown of our relationship that I started to go, this isn't normal. You know, what happened to me? Like, having that being removed from the actual relationship, I was able to go, what I went through was not normal and it wasn't healthy. So if it's not healthy, what is it? And I was like, it's probably a bit toxic. And that's what kind of got me on the track of figuring out what a toxic relationship looked like, you know, what happens in those sort of relationships, in the term. In fact, I had a girlfriend that sent me a video on YouTube that was all about what is narcissism. And that is when, like, the whole can of worms opened for me. And I went down the rabbit hole, and I was researching and reading articles and watching YouTube videos and listening to podcasts and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, holy shizzle, he was narcissistic, and he was gaslighting, and he was doing all these, you know, tactics and strategies and stuff that I could actually start to conceptualize and not just experience as a woman that was, you know, in love and falling out of love at that time. I was actually able to go, oh, that's exactly what he did. What a smarty. Like, I think on some level he knew what he was doing, even though he didn't know what the word was, because he had also studied law. So they're very good at, you know, negotiating and turning conversations around, and, you know, basically things backfiring on you because they're so skilled with how they speak. And that's when I really learnt that power as well. I was like, wow. So I didn't know until after.
So this is so good information. And please name it. Name what it is.
Yeah, like what he did.
Gaslighting. Yeah, if you know the names of the terms, please do. And if you can give example of it, that could be good too.
Yeah. So gaslighting was a big one.
Yes. Keep going.
Everyone knows what gaslighting is these days. It's quite a trendy, popular term. But basically, I would say something that was, like, to a normal person, and normal I mean not narcissistic or struggling with NPD. I would say I would just be speaking my truth and just being honest about something that, you know, and I'm not a spiteful, hurtful person, so it's out of my nature to kind of, like, you know, unleash myself on someone. But the way that he reacted to a bit of my truth was like that. And then he would turn it around on me and go, Olivia, you're making me angry. Or the reason why I got so upset was because you pissed me off, you know. So it was always my fault. And he was always trying to get me to take responsibility for his bad moods. And he could fly off the handle at any time. You know, whenever he chose was the time to do it, it would just happen. Like, I could say something that was, like, not even offensive, but he would spin it into being offensive or would upset him or something like that, and then blame it on me. So that was one of them, gaslighting for sure. The other one was physical intimidation. So he would, if we had a disagreement, and by the way, our relationship was quite tumultuous. It had high highs, low lows. You know, I felt like I could experience the whole emotional spectrum in one day towards the end of our relationship. And so we would have disagreements, and usually it was just a values conflict. We didn't have the same values in the end. At the start of the relationship, I thought we did, you know, because he was telling me and showing me things that he knew that I wanted to see and hear in order to think that he was compatible and fall in love with him. When in actual fact, years later, he didn't think those things at all. You know, that wasn't his lifestyle, or wasn't his way of thinking or anything like that, right? So that's when the conflict started to happen. We started to clash. And so when those sort of things happened, and at the end of the day, like, when it comes to narcissistic people, they want to be right. They want to be told that they're right, that, you know, being wrong is not something that is in their vocabulary. Do you know what I mean? And even if they've got to bully you into submission, they will do that. So a lot of the time our arguments turned into, you know, us disagreeing on a matter, but because he was so persistent and would follow me around the house until I gave in, because he could go all night. Like, there were times that we would fight until like 3 or 4 in the morning, and I had to get up for a hospital shift at 5 a.m. So I'd be doing shifts on like 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 hours sleep, and I was bloody exhausted. And when you work in a hospital, it's quick, it's fast paced, you need to be on your game. You know, you can't just have a relaxed day at work. It doesn't really work like that in healthcare. So I realized that it was starting to become detrimental to my health. But I think it was just the fact that, the physical intimidation, he would not leave an argument until I, in the end, said, you're right. Or I see what you're saying. Or being forced to apologize because it would not end. He was like a dog with a bone. It wouldn't end until I was like, I give up, I'm done. I can't do this for 8 more hours. You know what I mean? Like that's how long it would go sometimes, all day.
Wow, a lot of stuff in there. When was the moment you said this is enough and you decided to end the relationship?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I kind of liken my relationship to erosion. So for those that don't know what that means, it's kind of like if you think of a cliff or a piece of land or a beach cliff or something like that, eventually the land starts to flatten, it starts to erode over time because of the weather and all this sort of stuff. Our relationship was the same. So there was, I'd say probably we had a break over Christmas. Things blew up, we had a break, we got back together, and things were never the same from that point on. So that was about just over 6 months, I think it was, where things weren't great. I tried everything to pull it together, but it was just nothing I did worked. And it was just the relationship slowly dying. I know for me, I had started to fall out of love with him long before that, but I still loved him. Like I still had that love for him. I still wanted it to work. I still wanted to have the dream of the white picket fence and that big white wedding and the husband and the 3 kids with the dog and all that sort of stuff, right? So I was clinging on to that. And it slowly eroded and got to the point where we weren't meeting each other's love languages at all. We weren't even going to bed together anymore. He was sleeping on the couch. Our sex life was virtually non-existent. Sorry to get a little bit too personal there, guys. And I remember probably the last few weeks, there was one moment we went to a friend's house for a dinner, and things were really bad at this point, and we were in the car and he put his hand on my leg because he could, we didn't even sit next to each other at that friend's house. Like we sat on opposite sides of the room, which was very weird for us because we were always very touchy-feely, all over each other sort of thing. And I remember thinking, this is really weird. I feel like we're friends. And it got to the point where we were living together and it just felt like we were housemates. I didn't feel like we had that relationship, that loving relationship anymore. It just felt like housemates that lived together, and it was empty, that empty feeling. And then on the drive home, he put his hand on my leg and I just felt completely repulsed and disgusted by his physical touch. And I remember I was really shocked because I'm quite an affectionate person in a relationship. Like one of my love languages is quality touch. I love to be touched, all the time, and I like to give it out too. And I just remember like every cell in my body was repulsed by his hand. And I remember thinking, that's really weird. Like I've never felt like that before with any of my partners in the past ever. And the thought of kissing him made me want to vomit. So I was like, ooh, there's something really wrong here. And then I was really happy that he didn't come to bed that night. I just wanted the bed to myself for like the first time in months because I was begging him to come to bed. I wanted to sleep together. I wanted cuddles and I wanted to get that relationship back. But I just didn't want that. And so I remember towards the end, so that had happened. And I think it was like either the next day or sometime that week. I can't quite remember because when you're all in it, it's all very cloudy. You're overwhelmed with emotion. We kept saying, oh, we need to have a conversation. We need to have a big conversation. And because I was working so many shifts in a row and doing night shifts and all this sort of stuff, I said, okay, I can do Friday. And I remember I had a counseling session booked in for Friday because at that point I was just so desperate for help, just for it to work, for me to do anything I could. I was taking on all the burden myself to make it work. He wasn't doing anything, which is a big classic of big sign of codependence as well, is when you're the one that's putting in all the effort. Went to this counselor. I'd been seeing her for weeks, and I remember I was sitting in the chair and she asked me this one potent question that I will never ever forget. And this is when everything shifted for me completely. And she said to me, after I'd been going on and complaining about what he wasn't doing and what can I do and blah, 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 she said, Olivia, what has he done for you the past 6 months? And I sat there in the chair and I was like, I'm trying to think. I'm like, okay, he hasn't come to bed with me. He hasn't gone on any dates with me. When we have, we've fought, hasn't been worth it. He's been late by an hour, hasn't made any investment whatsoever, hasn't said anything nice to me, hasn't told me that he loves me, that I look pretty, like literally nothing, no gifts, nothing. There was no love there really. And I sat there and that's when I had that lightning bolt moment where everything shifted into clarity. And it was kind of like, well, fuck me. He has done nothing for me these past 6 months. I'm doing everything. And I was just like, and she said, okay, cool. Are you prepared to do that for another 6 months? And I said to her, I can't even do that for another day. And so I went to drive home and my car broke down. It was really funny, actually. It was such a metaphor, I think, for how things were in my life at that point. My car broke down and it was night. It was like 8 o'clock. It was dark. It was cold. Yeah, anyway, so I got home and we knew that we had to have that conversation. We knew that it was going to happen that night. I just didn't know that it was going to be that conversation. I did not think it was going to be a breakup conversation. And I brought him to the bedroom and I burst into tears and I said, I'm really sorry. I just can't do this anymore. And I kept apologizing, which is another sign of codependency. Like it was all my fault. Like I couldn't make it work, which in hindsight is complete bullshit. It takes two to tango, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at me completely unemotionally and he said, okay, cool. So this is what's going to happen. You're going to take this. I'm going to take that. This is how it's going to work. But went full into breakup mode. He had it all worked out in his mind already. Like he'd already thought about it because he said to me, if you weren't going to do it tonight, I was going to. So I was taken back by that because I had only just made the decision like an hour prior to actually sitting down and talking to him. And he had already fast forward like the whole breakup, who was going to get what, how it was going to work. And I was just shocked. I was flabbergasted. Not only had I gone through the shock of realizing my relationship was ending, and then the shock of actually having to go home and have that discussion, which is something that you can't undo. Once it's done, it's done. And then the shock of him kind of going, okay, cool, like that, he was detached. And that's when I realized he is not in this relationship like I am. He had no emotion towards me. It was all very much like matter of fact, logical, this is how it's going to work, blah, 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 like he saw it coming. And so I went and stayed at my mum's house that night. And the next day I got the delivery people in and got all my stuff out of there. And he had a whole bunch of mates over there, you know, playing the PlayStation, laughing, drinking, while I'm there packing up our bedroom, crying, upset, devastated, you know, typical narcissistic thing to do. Didn't tell anyone until he had to because it looked bad on him. People were like, why would you break up with Olivia? Like, you know, they would be like, she's great for you. Like, why did this happen? This makes no sense. And so it would force him to have to kind of answer those hard and tough questions. So that's kind of how that all came about. So it was a defining moment, yes, but it took a lot of moments for me to kind of realize this is not going to work. And then that final night with the counselor, that was the breaking point. Best thing ever, by the way.
Yeah, it was a challenge in the moment, but anyway, it was the best.
It was the best thing. Yeah, it all turned out the way it was meant to, 100%.
This is a lot of good stuff. I love it. I'm loving this conversation. So do you
thank you, me too.
Do you have materialistic things together? Like, do you have to separate stuff, or do you have to go through court, or what do you have and how do you do it?
Yeah, so we had 2 properties together. So unfortunately, we were building a house, our dream house. It had 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. That was going to be the house we were going to, you know, get married and have kids in. And we broke up 2 weeks before we got the keys to that property. So I was devastated as well because I was so hell-bent on wanting that dream and that wedding and that marriage and the kids, and I had and the house took forever to build, by the way. There was lots of issues with it, and like I could see ourselves living here and putting our furniture in there and having our friends over on a Saturday night and like all this sort of stuff. So when that happened, you know, once again I was, you know, devastated. So I had that property, and then we also had an investment property, which my brother and my mother were living in at the time because they needed somewhere to live. And we're like, hey, we've got this unit, feel free to move in. And that's where I went to that night when we broke up, you know, for salvation, just to kind of survive. I was like, it's still my property, but, you know, it was a really weird feeling. But anyway, so yeah, we had 2 properties. I had been purchasing items ready for the house as well to furnish. So I had like brand new gorgeous cutlery from like David Jones or Myers. It was like, you know, top of the line, beautiful. You know, I'd saved and worked my ass off for that sort of stuff, and had this brand new smart TV and all these bits and pieces. And, you know, the night that I broke up with him, he was like, well, you can take the TV, you can take this, I'll take that, blah, blah, blah. He had it all worked out. Like it was a list he was going through. And that's what shocked me because I wasn't even ready to think about that. And then, you know, because things are different value, I think what I really had to kind of sit there and kind of think about was the fact that it was never going to be 100%, well, never going to be 50-50. Down the line, 50-50. You know, there's always going to be something that is more sentimental to one person or is worth more to the other person or actually is dollar value, whatever, right? So it's never going to be 50-50, but it has to feel, or it should feel somewhat fair. Like you shouldn't be feeling like you're getting raped with your finances or, you know, completely taken advantage of. So in that regard, I was quite lucky until he got a bit nasty down the track when he tried to trick me. And because, you know, he was in real estate, he was in law, he was in economics, he was quite smart, quite educated, he knew how all these things worked. And so he tried to trick me and sign over the investment property to him before we had worked out the house that we built. So I moved into that for 6 months because of the first home buyers grant and all these technicalities. So he was cool with that. So I moved in here, which is where I'm living, and I own this house officially now, which is great. But it was a long process to get there. I went through a 2-year legal battle, I suppose you'd say, with him. So when he tried to trick me into signing over the house, that's when I realized I really need someone on my side. I need lawyers. I don't know this world. He has the upper hand. He's got the advantage of knowing how all this works and property law and all of this sort of stuff. And I had refused to have any communication with him anymore via email. So I had blocked him on Facebook. I had done that whole, like, I still had the trauma bond at play, right? So I needed to sever that and do my best to not go running back or feeding into his crap. So I blocked him on all the social media channels. He only had access to me via email. And then when he tried to trick me, I was like, oh my gosh, this is my financial well-being here. I have to take this really seriously. He knows more than me. That's when I decided to engage lawyers after some of my friends encouraged me to do that as well, which was the best decision. And I really should have done it so much earlier. By the way, whoever's listening or watching this, if you are with someone that's narcissistic, don't trust that they have your best interests at heart. They don't. It might seem like it. They might try and paint the picture that you're still a team and all this sort of stuff. At the end of the day, you're separated or you're divorced or you're breaking up. They care about themselves. You need to look after your own financial well-being. So go consult a lawyer ASAP, know where you stand. Everyone's circumstances are so different. Like I can't stress that enough. That's the biggest piece of advice I'll give you. I wish I had done it a lot earlier. It could have ended up really differently for me. So went through that channel with the lawyers, and he threatened to take me to court like every 2 weeks. It really ran up my legal bills. So I was paying a lot of money throughout this process. And, you know, some people ask me, why don't you just kind of like give in or give up? And I said to them, well, I could have done that, but then all of the thousands of dollars that I'd already paid my lawyer for would have been for nothing. And you kind of reach a point where you're so, like you're like a mouse on a wheel. Once that wheel's running, it's really hard to get off that wheel. You know, like you've made that decision, you're already halfway through the journey. If you give up now, like what's that going to mean for you? So I felt all this pressure to have to keep going. I didn't feel like I could just give up and pull out. You know, I'd already paid all this money, and so in the end I had to make that decision. I'm still going to fight for this, even if it doesn't work out in my best interest. And I was really lucky because he had found love during this time with a mutual friend. So he had gotten married as well. He got engaged 5 months later after our breakup, got married to this woman. They were living in our investment property. And so he had that distraction. So a lot of my friends were like, oh my gosh, you must feel so betrayed and upset. And I'm like, nah, this is brilliant. I was like, this couldn't have worked out any better, because if he didn't have her to focus on and their new relationship and wedding and stuff, you know, he would have been full steam ahead, you know, riding me that whole 2 years. So I was actually really glad that worked out that way. And in the end, it took a lot of persistence. It took a lot of tears. I had begged God to help me win this and make sure I came out okay. It was a really tough time. Like I had to let go of any control I had and just do my best. And I struggled with anxiety because I thought I had fears that he'd burn down my house. Like all sorts of stuff was going on. And through just pure persistence and faith, I had to really surrender to like the greater plan and whoever was out there looking out for me. And in the end, I had to tell the lawyer, even the lawyer said to me, Olivia, now's the time to kind of give up. And I was like, no. I said, no, you send him an email, you do this, you do that. I had to kind of really step into that leadership role because my lawyer was over it. And to her, I wasn't a multimillionaire. So the lawyer I had engaged was someone that was used to dealing with, you know, rich people. She was referred to me by a friend. They said she'd be a dog in the courtroom, so you want her. But unfortunately, she was a dog out of the courtroom as well, and I didn't like her. And funnily enough, she was narcissistic too. So that's the other thing I want your audience to be aware of, is how lawyers present themselves to be on the first visit isn't always accurate either. They know how to play people. They know how to read people. That's their job. So she kind of presented herself to be a certain way. I liked that, signed on with her, and found out she was actually quite horrible outside of the courtroom and even to her clients. And because I wasn't a big client, like a big corporation or a multimillionaire, to her, I was just like the little dredges on the side, like, let's just wrap this up already. Like, there's not a lot of money in this. She even said to me, your relationship wasn't long, it was short. You know, all these things, which I guess as a lawyer, yeah, it probably was short compared to your 30, 40-year marriages, you know, where they'd got, and like literally dealt with millionaires and stuff. I wasn't in that I wasn't in her typical category.
Mm.
So yeah, you have to be your own advocate as well. And you are the one that is dictating your life, not just the lawyers and your ex. So you've got to really listen to intuition and kind of go and weigh it up as well.
So you keep going until what? What happened?
Oh, it was looking like I was going to lose the house and lose ownership and we'd have to sell. And I was in Queensland at this time going to a convention for my first business. I was in a network marketing company and was at their first conference. And it was beautiful and glamorous. And the girls were all done up with makeup. And there was like these big, beautiful fine dining dinners. And we were at, was it SeaWorld? We were at SeaWorld. And I got the phone call from my lawyer saying, Olivia, you know, he's threatened to take you to court again. If he does this next thing, it means you're going to have to go to court. And I was just like beside myself. I couldn't ever go on a holiday or get away without my lawyer contacting me because he knew when I was leaving. He had like this sixth sense, or he knew from flying monkeys that I was, you know, going to a Hands Party weekend away or going to this conference or whatever was like a holiday or anything like that. He would jump on his lawyer to get involved with my lawyer to contact me and spoil it. So typical narcissistic thing to do.
Mm.
And the other thing too, by the way, with narcissistic lawyers is they dump all the crap on you on a Friday afternoon and then they go away for the weekend. So you've got to deal with all this upsetting news and manage your own emotions and anxiety and worries and concerns. And then you can't even address anything until the Monday when they're back in the office. And I've got a legal friend and she's like, yeah, they do that deliberately. So they give you time to process everything and then deal with it the next week, which I can understand the thought process, but it's also really horrible for the client because you're being threatened to go to court again, or this next bomb has been dropped and you're like, what the hell? And you can't even contact your lawyer about it. They just send you an email. Anyway, so what was the question again? Sorry, I'm going on a rant now.
No, it's totally fine. It's what happened in the end? Like, did
Oh,
you?
yes. So my lawyer called me in Queensland, burst into tears, once again, had to go away from the group. We were supposed to be a fun day, you know, at the theme park. And she's like, Olivia, I think you need to give up now. You know, I think we've reached the end of this journey, blah, blah, blah. And I said to her, I was like, no, I have not fought this hard for this long
Mm.
and paid you this much money to give in now. I was like, you get back to him and send him this. She didn't like it, but she worked for me. So I was like, fuck that shit. Like, I've just paid you like so much money to end
Mm.
up with nothing. Are you kidding me? You could have saved me these 2 years. We could have just sold the house. You know, like I had no idea it was going to drag on for so long. So in the end, it was just pure persistence, lots of praying, lots of begging, lots of surrendering, because you only got so much control in this. You know, you do your part and the rest, you know, you really don't have a lot of control over.
Mm.
And I think also the fact that he had this new wife, I think she was over it as well. She was probably over the fact of like with all this drama, all the lawyers, all the costs. I'm sure that, you know, any woman would want to just get on with life, you know, cut off the ex, just be done with it so you can move on and enjoy your relationship and not have this shadow or this thing
Mm.
hanging over your head. So once again, it was a blessing in disguise because I could imagine that that's what she was thinking and feeling. And I did know this woman. So that also had an element to it too. So I think in the end, it was pure persistence, to be honest with you, and just taking no for not taking no for an answer.
Yeah, and from there you kept your house. You kept your house.
I did, yeah. So I paid him out. I paid him out a lot of money. He got the investment property with his new wife, and I got the newly built home. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
So it worked out
Whoa,
well in the end. But you've got to be strategic. You got to be
whoa.
strategic. Yeah.
Especially with narcissistic because they change every time the story.
Just when you feel like you've figured something out and the goalposts, they will move them. And then
Yeah.
you've got to redirect you're kind of like, wait, what? And then you've got to redirect your strategy. So the best advice I'd give to your audience if they're going through this or potentially are going to go through this is firstly, take the emotion out of it as much as you can. Have your cry, smash plates, whatever you've got to do to get the emotion out, but don't bring that to the narcissist and do not bring that to your lawyer. They are factual, they want black and white, they just see it as like a transactional agreement.
Mm.
They don't care that you're upset, that your life is fallen to pieces, that you're in devastation, because they deal with this stuff all the time. It's their bread and butter, it's their normal day to day, yeah? So as soon as you understand that, realize, yes, it's devastating for you as a person, as a woman, your life feels like it's falling apart, you don't know who the fuck you are anymore, like all this sort of stuff's going on, your health is suffering. You need to compartmentalize, push that to the side. When you engage with lawyers and the narc is no longer your friend, the narc is no longer on your team, the narc is after their own stuff, and you need to be the same way. trying to outsmart the narc can be a very tricky, dangerous game to play, because to outsmart a narc, you have to think like one. And naturally, you're probably not, right? Like, you're going against your nature, and you're probably never going to fully understand them. You know, you can do all the research you want, but you're not in their brain. You're not thinking their thoughts. You're not operating the way that they operate. So as long as you understand how they work, like from that side of things, that's enough to be able to get you through. But empowering yourself with education and knowing what sort of manipulation that they'll do, expect them to be difficult. So I'm not saying to expect them and bring that about through manifestation, but they're difficult personalities, right? So they're, you know, be smart enough to be able to read the room and go, yeah, they're not going to let this go easily necessarily. They may or may not, right? But if you've got one that's like mine, or was like mine, he won't go quietly, he won't go easily, even though he tries to make it seem like that. The other thing too is have lots of support, and make sure you choose support that isn't in on both of your sides. Only choose a support that you know is completely is for you and is like Team Olivia or within your camp. You know, they haven't got a foot here and in your camp and a foot in his camp. Make sure that they're just in your life. You can fully trust them. Don't be picking people that are still their friend and still in contact with them and they want to be friends with both of you. Like, it's well intentioned and lovely, but this is a time where it's like, it's game on. You know, it's not time to, there's an element of slowing down and healing yourself and all that, but there's an element of like, you're not going to fucking mess with me, mate. Like, you've done that for the last X amount of years. If you want to fight, bring it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I had to bring out that masculine side of myself because I knew that it was necessary. And if I didn't, I wouldn't have this house, 100%.
Yeah, yeah, and I think, yeah, emotionally as well, you become stronger going
Oh,
through
yes.
going through that process. So it's not only about the house; it is about the woman who you become now.
Yes, I really like that. It's so true, Giselle. 100%. So this whole situation, and by the way, this happened years ago now, guys, like 4 years, 3 years or something ago. So, you know, I've moved on, but talking about it kind of brings you back to that space a little bit, but 100%. So something that really helped me was visualizing how I would feel once this is all done. So you can get very caught up in what's happening now and freaking out and all that, but you've got to think about, okay, once this is over, what is life going to look like and feel like? And you may not fully know, but you've got to try to imagine and dream, because there's got to be a light at the end of the tunnel. You know, there always is, there has to be. So you've got to give that to yourself and allow those visualizations and feelings to arise. And also, it does teach you a lot of lessons. So in the moment, it can feel like shit. It can feel awful. You can feel huge amounts of despair and hopelessness and helplessness. You're just trying to keep it together. You're trying to get through every day. But what it does teach you is how strong you are and the extent of your strength as well. And once you go through something like that, like, honestly, I always say, when you've been through a really toxic, narcissistic, abusive, horrible relationship, like, you might feel weak from it. I know I definitely did. It's taken me like years for my body to feel normal again, like not so exhausted.
Mm.
Um, I think, yeah, like it can feel like that, but I think at the same time, there's so many lessons and realizations that you get from it. Like, wow, like I know for me, a lot of the lessons were, wow, I had no idea I was codependent. I had no idea that I was attracted to narcissistic men. Why is that? And I learnt about why that was. I've learnt about, yeah, my strength as a woman. I've been through a lot of shit in my life, but that was definitely the hardest I've ever been through. And I think if I've been through that, I can make it through anything. Do you know what I mean? Because that made me question everything to who I was at my core and what I was capable of, what I was capable of completely. Do you know what I mean? All of my abilities, all of my strength, all of my resilience, all of my perseverance, everything. Which sets you up well for business too, by the way, guys, because it requires a lot of that too. But it's like, yeah, it definitely lets you realize how much gumption you've got. Do you know what I mean? And I remember there was one scene from a movie that really helped me like through this, and that was The Holiday. Have you seen or heard of The Holiday with Kate
Yeah,
Winslet?
yeah.
Yeah. So there's a scene there where she's talking to this older guy who was in film, and he said to her something like, you know, you're acting like you're the best friend in a movie. You're not acting like the lead role. And it was like a big epiphany for Kate Winslet. She's sitting there and she's like, oh my gosh, you're so right. I've never heard anyone tell me this before. And I've been seeing a therapist for years. She's like, I've been acting like the best friend, like a victim, you know, rather than the leading lady. I'm the leading lady of my life. Holy shit. Do you know what I mean? And that to me was an epiphany too, because I was like, I've been the passenger in my relationship and in my life. And now I need to be the driver or the captain. And only you're the only person that can make that happen by stepping into that role.
Mm. So what I can see in today's interview, plus since I met you is all of that what you fight for, your persistent, your masculine energy that you have to fight for your house. And after you at the same time feminine energy allowed to surround that because you cannot control even more. And it's like was all the time a persistent where you got your house in the end. At the same time now it's like what you did is you become a life coach, relationship coach, and now you're a podcaster, which
Yes.
can you tell us how you, with all of your experience, how do you help women now?
Yeah. Well, I like the fact that you touch on the masculine and the feminine energy because through a breakup with a narcissist, it does require both.
Mm,
I know for me, I was very much in my feminine energy in my relationship because I was forced to be. He had enough masculine energy to run an army, so he was the dominant one, and I was like the little submissive, people pleaser doormat at the time, which, by the way, like I can't even really like that's like such a different person. Like I don't even recognize her anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm just so different. Like I'm looking forward to bumping into each other because he's not even going to know who I am. But anyway, different story. Yeah, so definitely like be step more into your masculine energy. Do you know what I mean? To make things happen, masculine energy is all about doing and getting things done and results. So you need to have that for sure, even though you don't feel like you might be up for it or have the energy to do it during your legal battle or legal fight.
mm,
But then once you've done your 50%, you've done the best that you can, then you've got to sit back and go, I release all of this. I've done everything that I can. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I've done the best that I could possibly do. And whatever's meant to happen will happen from this. So definitely get into that receiving energy. And also having the way I did that was hopping into relaxation baths at the end of the day. I'd get my bubble bath out, my Epsom salts, a glass of wine, some music, some candles. I'd get into that feminine energy and just like, it's the day is nearly over. I'm going to relax and enjoy this. Like, how can I enjoy this moment more?
mm.
So yeah, you need the two. That was the first part. The second part. So was that question around how did I get into podcast coaching, or how did I move from relationship
No,
coaching to business coaching?
how you use all of your experiences to help women now.
Ooh, that's a good one. So it's funny, actually. I just finished up with a client that I worked with for 12 months yesterday, and I was helping her through her divorce and property settlement with her narcissistic ex-husband and all this. So my experience got me like into relationship coaching, so helping people overcome their narcissistic partners or exes, whatever, and realize their own codependency and work through those issues. Because if you don't work through those issues, then you attract another narcissistic person because naturally they fit together, but you can level up so that you can have a healthy version of that. So that's also probably another podcast episode, but anyway.
Oh.
So that's kind of how that happened. And then I got into business coaching because I wanted to be able to help women create a life of freedom. And I'm still on that journey myself. I'm not a six-figure coach yet where I'm like drinking Mai Tais on the beach and financially free. Like I'm building towards that, of course, but I wanted to help women feel that sense of freedom because I know for me, in hindsight, a lot of my life I felt very restricted by lots of different circumstances. It's just that the narcissistic one is the one I talk about or used to talk about the most when I was in that space.
Mm,
So then I moved into business coaching because I was like, cool, I've reached a level of, consistent income and nearly replacing my income and all this sort of stuff. And I want to help other women do the same. And so that's kind of what I moved into. And I got into business coaching and loved it, but it was very broad. And then I realized I need to niche down into podcast coaching because it's the thing that's always been there from the beginning. I started my podcast before my business. And it's also a platform, and this is from personal experience as well, is like, when I was in the narcissistic space, I had my podcast all around that, sharing my stories, getting experts on, dating coaches, relationship coaches, divorce coaches, celebrities, talking about their toxic past and relationships and what they learned so that I could spread that word to
mm,
help other women going through the same thing that I had and we had and all this. So that's kind of where the podcast started, and it's evolved since then, as I've evolved into business coaching and now into podcast coaching. And so at the end of the day, what I'm really passionate about now is helping women find their voice and use their voice and share their voice. So what I mean by that is, as I said, when my relationship was eroding, so did all my boundaries, so did my needs, so did my voice, so did speaking up for myself. All that people pleasing stuff took over, and I lost my voice. I lost who I was in that relationship. And then coming out of it, I had to find out who that person was. And so I started to find my voice when I started to find myself. And that's when this podcast started. And I knew that I wasn't an expert at that point. I was still learning, but I knew enough to share, and I'd healed enough to share with others. And by doing so, it actually helped other people find their voice, which is what I'm all about. So the podcasting route is just the way to do that. Do you know what I mean? So, you know, I want to help empower other people share their stories to help have a greater impact in their own way as well. So, you know, and through this experience, I've had people that have been in a toxic narcissistic relationship and started a podcast. You know, people in business start a podcast, all sorts of different walks of life. And so I guess my bigger mission and my bigger goal now is just to help empower women to use their voice, because a lot of codependent women, and myself included, used to struggle with that, or still do struggle with that, having the confidence to speak up and out. Some people have got no issues speaking out on matters, or speaking their truth, or just putting it out there and not caring about criticism, or, you know, imposter syndrome or whatever. Like, they do their thing and they find it easy. But for me, I wasn't one of those people. I found it very hard. I found it very tricky. It pushed me out of my comfort zone. You know, even now I still have to remind myself, you know enough to talk on this. It's okay. You know what I mean? Like, even if your story helps one person, that's enough. You know, if it helps more than that, it's just the cherry on top. So it's a constant reminder, because it's not my natural way of being, because of all my transformative experiences, especially through my narcissistic relationship. Was, you know, for me, if I kept quiet, I was safe. So psychologically, I learned if I shut my mouth and don't argue with him, I can't be berated. I can't be socially humiliated in front of family and friends. He's got nothing to pick on. There's no arguments that can start when you zip up, zip your lips and be quiet. Although that wasn't true, because he'd still pick fights anyway, but like, it was less likely if I kept my mouth shut. So that's what I learned through that relationship. And what I learned at the end of it was I had to speak up and speak out and get out. And that only happened because I spoke up. And then through the legal battle, you know, that required me to speak up constantly through every single obstacle and hurdle. And if my lawyer telling me just to give up and basically shut up and get over it. And I was like, fuck no, like, that's not going to work for me anymore. Like, that hasn't worked for me in the past. It did for a while. Didn't work out for me, really. So what's the alternative? The opposite. And so that's what I try and help other women do now.
Nice. Awesome. Awesome. How important is for women to use their voices for a greater impact and influence in the world?
I think it's huge. I really do. Like, you know, I look back on my journey, for example, and when I was in that crisis mode, when my life felt like it was falling apart, when it was actually just kind of falling together, let's be honest, I couldn't use my voice then. I wasn't ready. I wasn't at that point. You know, I was still going through my own stuff. But since then, I've realized the importance of that. You know, I realize now that if I had used my voice and didn't allow everything to get eroded and my boundaries to go and all this sort of stuff, I would never have ended up in that relationship for as long as I did. So realizing that it was preventable with actually using my voice and maintaining my voice, that's been a huge lesson for me, because I know that if I had been that best version of myself and I had realized all this information and stuff, I would never have gone through all that pain. I know now that I was meant to go through all that, and I wouldn't have this lesson without it, of course. So I think the whole reason of helping women use their voice and find their voice is to use it as a self-empowerment tool for themselves firstly, because that's how my podcast started, was to really empower myself and others. Sorry. But then also to empower other people. Do you know what I mean? So, and I think there's a way to go about that, you know, like, I'm all for everyone speaking up for themselves and speaking their truth and, you know, doing their thing and living their life and helping social and cultural change and stuff. But there's also a way to do it. You know, no one really likes Bible bashers, right? No one likes, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses coming and intruding in their space by knocking on their door. No one likes going to the shopping centers and having those independent shop people try and hook you in with a question and not let you go or walk past. You know, no one likes to be like, you know, approached like that. So even though I'm all about sharing your voice and spreading your message and, you know, using your mission and doing that vocally, there's also a way to do it that's not going to be in people's faces, piss them off, scare them away. You know, there's a middle ground. So that's one thing that I really want to set the bar on with speaking out about issues, is to do it in a way that, you know, is not going to be, what's that saying, on deaf ears? What's that saying? Falling on deaf ears.
I speak Spanish, so it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, so Yeah, so I'm all for, you know, creating better and social change, like even the Black Lives Matter, you know, LGBTQ stuff, like any sort of social injustice, 100%. But at the same time, I think there's a way to go about it too. So there's a middle ground, which I'm wanting to teach through my podcast and public speaking and speaking with confidence and learning what your message is and how you can have greater impact and influence for yourself, but also for others, because it has to be too. If you're just doing it for others, eventually you'll burn out and get exhausted. And if you're just doing it for yourself, it comes from an extremely selfish place. So I think having a mixture and a balance is really healthy.
I love it. I love it. So where women can find you?
Yeah, so obviously my podcast, which is called Become a Podcast Queen. Now, it was called lots of different names prior to that, and all my episodes too on narcissistic relationships and toxicity, and all my interviews still remain there. I kept them there very purposefully, and I wanted to have them there to honor the women that, you know, might come to me with issues, which they still do, around toxicity and narcissism and codependency. So I refer them to my podcast because I don't really work in that space as much now. And yeah, and then you've got, yeah, like my podcasting, you know, topics and stuff now that I've rebranded. So yes, that's called Become a Podcast Queen. I'm on Instagram at Become a Podcast Queen, and I've got a link there. I only just created it yesterday, Linktree, so you can go to all my platforms from that point on. But if you don't use Instagram or don't want to, you can find me on Facebook, and my group is called Become a Podcast Queen Community, and I'm also on YouTube. So yeah.
Amazing. So guys, I'm going to link everything in the description below where you can reach Olivia. And thank you so much, Olivia, for today. I really appreciate it. It has been so helpful.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Bye guys. Bye, Olivia.
Bye.